You're an embarrassment to my in-laws. My son said it quietly, almost casually, as if he were giving me advice about my clothes. We were standing outside an expensive restaurant in Dallas, Texas. Inside, his wife's family was finishing dinner. I had been invited because it was my son's 40th birthday. At least, that was what I thought. I had driven 3 hours to be there. I had bought him an expensive watch. I had even stopped at a tailor's shop that afternoon, because Daniel had once complained that I always wore old jackets. Now he was looking at the same jacket. His face was tense. "Dad, please don't make this harder." I looked down at myself, a dark blue jacket, white shirt, black trousers, nothing fancy, nothing torn, nothing embarrassing. I don't understand. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Your truck, what about it? You parked it right outside." "Yes, it's old." I looked toward the parking lot. My pickup was 19 years old. It had scratches on the passenger door and a dent near the rear bumper. It was also paid off. "I've had it for years, I know, and it runs." "That isn't the point." "Then what is?" He glanced back toward the restaurant. "My wife's parents are important people." I almost smiled. "I know who they are. They're meeting several investors this night, and you need to be careful." I stared at him. "Careful about what?" "About how you present yourself." There was a pause. Then he said it. "You're an embarrassment to my in-laws." For several seconds I couldn't speak. I had expected many things from my son over the years. Disagreement, impatience, even disappointment, not embarrassment. I looked at him. "Did your mother ever embarrass you?" His expression changed. "Dad, don't do that." "I'm asking." "No." "Then why am I different?" He looked away. "That was a long time ago." I nodded. "So was my life before you." He sighed. "I didn't mean it like that." "You said exactly what you meant." He reached into his pocket. "Just go home after dinner." I looked at the restaurant. "What about the birthday?" "It's fine." "Do you want the watch?" He looked surprised. "What?" I took the box from my coat. "You can have it now." He hesitated, then took it. "Thanks." I handed it over. He didn't hug me. He didn't apologize. He simply walked back inside. I stood in the parking lot for a moment. Then I got into my old truck. I didn't go home. I drove to a small hotel near the highway. I checked in. I sat on the edge of the bed. And for the first time in 40 years, I asked myself a question I should have asked much earlier. What had my son become ashamed of? My truck, my clothes, my work, or me? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. And the next afternoon, the answer began to appear in a way I never expected. My son's father-in-law called me. He asked for a business loan. "My name is Michael Carter." I was 68 when my son called me an embarrassment. I had spent most of my life working with my hands. For 32 years I owned a commercial plumbing company. Nothing glamorous, no glass office, no polished reception desk, just warehouses, service vans, invoices, employees, and thousands of jobs nobody noticed unless something went wrong. I liked that life. It paid well enough. I owned my house. I had no mortgage, no car payments, no credit card debt. By the time I retired, I had saved carefully. I wasn't a millionaire, but I had something more important to me. I didn't owe anyone. My wife, Linda, used to joke that I could turn any broken pipe into a 3-hour lecture. She died 8 years before the dinner. Cancer. After that, Daniel became my whole world. He was 29 at the time. He was already working in corporate sales and constantly talking about becoming successful. I encouraged him. When he wanted a better car, I helped. When he wanted to start a small consulting company, I gave him $40,000. When that business failed, I didn't remind him. When he met Olivia, I was relieved. She was confident, educated, well-connected, and her family had money. Her father, Richard Bennett, owned several commercial real estate properties and a logistics company. Their family dinners took place in private clubs. Their vacations were expensive. They talked about business deals, the way ordinary people talked about football. Daniel loved it. At first, I did too. I thought he had finally found the world he wanted. Then I noticed something. Whenever Olivia's family visited, Daniel changed. His voice became different. His clothes became more expensive. He stopped talking about his childhood. He stopped mentioning my business. If someone asked what I did, he would say, "My father ran a small company." Small, that word became his favorite. He never said I built it from nothing. He never mentioned that I had employed 32 people at its peak. He never told them that I had paid for his college, or that the small company had funded his first apartment. I didn't correct him. I thought he was trying to fit into Olivia's family. Then one day, Olivia's younger brother asked me, "So, Michael, do you still work?" I laughed. "No, I'm retired," he smiled. Must be nice. It wasn't insulting. But I noticed Daniel looking away. That was the beginning of the distance. Soon, invitations became formal, then rare. I learned about family vacations from photographs online. I learned about Daniel's business plans after they were already decided. And when he bought a new house, he didn't ask me to help. That should have made me happy. Instead, I felt something had changed. My son didn't want my help anymore. He wanted my silence. The morning after Daniel insulted me, I was drinking coffee at the hotel when my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. Hello? Michael Carter? Yes. This is Richard Bennett. I sat up. Olivia's father. Mr. Bennett? Richard is fine. I looked out the window. How did you get my number? Daniel gave it to me some time ago. That surprised me. Is everything all right? There was a pause. No, I waited. Then he said, I need to ask you a personal question. Go ahead. I've been told you have experience with business financing. I almost laughed. I owned a plumbing company. I know. What can I do for you? I need a loan. I stared at the wall. I'm sorry? A business loan. I sat back down. From me? Yes. I didn't answer. Richard continued. I'm starting a new logistics operation. I have property, equipment, and existing contracts, but the bank is delaying the financing. How much do you need? He gave me a number. I nearly dropped my coffee. It was substantial. More than I had ever lent anyone. Why would you ask me? Because I've heard you're careful with money. I smiled bitterly. That's an interesting thing to hear after last night. Richard was silent. Then he asked, what happened last night? I could have told him. I almost did. Instead, I said, ask your daughter. He exhaled slowly. I've already asked. That caught my attention. What did she say? She said Daniel was upset. That's all? Yes. I looked down at my coffee. Richard continued. Michael, I don't usually ask people for favors. I know. I also don't like asking for money. I understand. So before you answer, I want you to know something. What? I did not call you because you're Daniel's father. I waited. I called because someone told me you were the only person they trusted to make a rational decision. I stared at the phone. Who told you that? Richard paused. Daniel. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My son had called me an embarrassment the night before, and now apparently he had told his father-in-law I was the one man he trusted with a major financial decision. Those two facts could not both be true, unless there was something Daniel wasn't telling either of us. I called Richard back that afternoon. I have a question. Go ahead. Why do you really need the loan? He didn't answer immediately. I told you. You gave me the business explanation. Yes, I'm asking for the personal one. Silence. Then he said, my company is under pressure. How much pressure? Enough. That isn't an answer. He laughed quietly. You really are an engineer. I wasn't an engineer. You know what I mean. I waited. Finally, he said, Daniel doesn't know the whole situation. My stomach tightened. What situation? My family thinks the company is doing better than it is. And Olivia? She knows some of it. Does Daniel know? Only what I've chosen to tell him. I frowned. Why? Because I don't want him trying to fix it. I almost laughed. That may be the most honest thing I've heard all week. Richard became serious. I need financing to protect jobs and preserve several long-term contracts. And you want my money? Yes. I looked around the hotel room, the old leather chair, the plain carpet, the coffee cup. I thought about Daniel's words. You're an embarrassment to my in-laws. Then I thought about Richard calling me because I was apparently the person he trusted. I said, I won't give you the money yet. He exhaled. Fair enough, but I'll look at your numbers. There was silence. Why? Because if I'm going to make a decision, I need facts. Richard laughed softly. That sounds like the Michael I've heard about. Who told you about me? He hesitated. Then your son. I closed my eyes. Something was definitely wrong. Daniel had been telling different stories to different people. And I was beginning to suspect that the insult at the restaurant was not the real story. It was a cover, a very deliberate one. The following week, Richard sent me the financial records, and when I opened the first file, I discovered a payment connected to my own son. That was when I realized this had nothing to do with an old truck, and everything to do with money. The financial statement was almost 80 pages. I spent most of the afternoon going through it. Revenue, expenses, loans proper, repayroll, projected contracts. Everything looked difficult but not impossible. Then I saw a line item. Consulting payment. DC Strategic Advisory. The amount was $185,000. I recognized the initials DC Daniel Carter. I called Richard. What's DC Strategic Advisory? He went quiet. You found that? I did. What did Daniel tell you? Nothing. Richard sighed. That company belongs to your son. I leaned back. Why is your company paying him? That is exactly what I'm trying to understand. I stared at the number. Is it legitimate? I don't know. You've paid him $185,000 over 11 months. I did the math. That was more than many people earned in several years. Why? I was told he was providing consulting services. Was he? I've never seen a report. I closed my eyes. Richard, there's more going on here. Yes. What? I don't know yet. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. That's why I need your help. I looked at the spreadsheet again. My son's name sat beside a six-figure payment. The same son who had told me he was embarrassed by me. Suddenly the insult made sense. Maybe Daniel hadn't wanted me at that dinner because he was ashamed of my clothes. Maybe he was afraid I would say something. Maybe he knew I would recognize the numbers. Maybe most importantly, he knew his father-in-law trusted me. I closed the file. Then I called my lawyer. Andrew, yes, I need you to look into something for me. What kind of something? Something involving my son, his father-in-law, and a business loan. He was silent for a moment, then, Michael, what happened? I looked at the name on the screen. DC Strategic Advisory. I answered, I think my son called me an embarrassment because he was afraid I'd discover what he had been doing. And for the first time since Daniel was a boy, I stopped asking myself how I could protect him. I started asking a much harder question. What exactly was he protecting himself from? My lawyer came to my house 2 days later. Andrew Lewis had been handling my financial matters for years. He sat across from me with the documents spread across my dining table. How much did Richard send you? Everything he had. Andrew picked up the first folder. Have you spoken to Daniel? No. Good. I looked at him. Why? Because right now, you don't know which version of the story is true. I know my son. Andrew gave me a careful look. You know the son you raised. I didn't answer, he continued. You may not know the businessman he's become. That sentence stayed with me. We spent 3 hours reviewing the documents. The payments to Daniel's consulting company were real. The company was registered. The invoices existed. But the invoices were vague: strategic planning, market development, business advisory services. Nothing specific. No reports. No deliverables. No evidence that Daniel had performed work worth $185,000. Then we found something else. Several payments had been made within 48 hours of transfers from Richard's company to another account. That account belonged to a real estate company. The owner? Daniel's wife, Olivia. I looked at Andrew. You're telling me my son gets paid by his father-in-law, then the money moves into his wife's company. That's what the records suggest. For what? We don't know yet. I leaned back. My stomach felt heavy. Andrew tapped the table. This is why I wanted you to stop thinking emotionally. I'm not emotional. He gave me a small smile. You've been a father for 40 years. Of course you are. He was right. I wanted to believe Daniel had an explanation. I wanted to believe the payments were legitimate. I wanted to believe he had simply made a mistake, but the numbers were becoming harder to explain. Then Andrew opened another document. It was a property purchase, a commercial building in Austin. The buyer was Olivia's company. The purchase price was $640,000. I looked at the date. It was 6 months ago. The same week Richard had told me his company was short on cash. I looked at Andrew. Where did Olivia get $640,000? He shook his head. We're trying to trace that. I stared at the document. Then I remembered something. Daniel had told me 6 months earlier that Olivia's family had bought a new warehouse. He had sounded proud. I hadn't asked questions. Now I wished I had. Andrew closed the file. I think we should stop talking about a loan. Why? Because before Richard borrows another dollar, we need to know where the last dollars went. I nodded. That afternoon I called Richard. I can't approve the loan. There was a pause. I understand, but I'm not saying no permanently. What are you saying? I need a full independent review. He exhaled. I'll cooperate, and I want to know about every payment to Daniel. He became silent. Finally, he said, I'll give you access to everything. That answer told me something. Richard was afraid too. I met Olivia for coffee a week later. She looked exactly as I remembered her. Perfect hair, perfect coat, perfect smile. But her hands were shaking. Michael, she said. Olivia. She sat down. Why did you ask to meet me? Because I want the truth. She looked away. About what, Daniel? She stared at me. What about him? The payments from your father's company. Her face went pale. I don't know anything about those. I didn't respond. She looked at her coffee, then she whispered, I know some things. Good. She looked up. You think I stole from my father? I don't know what happened. I didn't. Then tell me. She took a long breath. Daniel told me the money was legitimate. I waited. He said your father was going to invest in his consulting company. I frowned. My father, Richard, that isn't true. I know that now. Why did you believe him? She smiled sadly. Because I wanted to. That answer hurt more than a lie. She continued. When Dad's company began struggling, Daniel said he had a way to help. What way? He said he knew investors. Did he? I don't think so. Then what happened? He started moving money. Where? She hesitated. To companies connected to us. I stared at her. You knew? I suspected. That isn't the same thing. I know. She looked down. I was scared. Of Daniel? She nodded. Why? Because every time I questioned him, he said I was going to ruin everything. I thought about my own conversation with Daniel. The same pressure, the same manipulation. Olivia finally looked at me. He told me you were dangerous. I almost laughed. Me? He said you were suspicious and old-fashioned. I nodded. That sounds familiar. Then she said, he also told me you had almost no money left. I stared at her. What? He said you'd spent everything on him. I leaned back. That was a lie, a very useful one. If Olivia believed I was financially weak, she would never question why Daniel was suddenly interested in my accounts. But there was something more. Did Daniel ever talk about getting money from me? She hesitated. Yes. How much? He said your retirement account could help save the company. I looked away. Of course, the insult had been part of a strategy. If he could make me feel ashamed enough, I might stay quiet. If he could make me feel unwelcome around his in-laws, he could keep me away from Richard. And if Richard was desperate enough, Daniel could control the story on both sides. I asked Olivia. Why did Richard call me? She looked confused. He said he needed someone he could trust. Why me? She paused then, because Daniel always said you were good with money. I laughed quietly. My son was telling the truth about one thing. 3 days later, Richard came to my house. He didn't bring a lawyer. He came alone. He sat at my kitchen table. The loan can wait, he said. I agree. He nodded. I owe you an apology. For what? For involving you. You didn't know. No. He looked tired. I should have known. I poured him coffee. What happens now? I've hired an independent auditor. Good. And I've frozen the consulting payments. He looked at me. Daniel called me. What did he say? He said you were trying to turn my family against him. I almost laughed. I haven't spoken to him. I know. Richard looked toward the window. I need to tell you something. What? When I first met Daniel, I liked him. So did I. He was ambitious. Yes, he made me feel like my daughter had chosen well. I nodded. Richard rubbed his hands together. I didn't realize how much he wanted my approval. I looked at him. Most people don't recognize that kind of insecurity. I do now. Then he said something unexpected. I don't want the loan anymore. I frowned. Why? Because I don't need a loan. I looked at him. What? I need to stop the bleeding. That was when I realized Richard had finally understood the real problem. Money wasn't the solution, accountability was. He looked at me. Michael, I want to make you an offer. What kind? I want you to join the restructuring committee. I laughed. I'm retired. You've spent 30 years running a company. I ran a plumbing company, which is still a company. I don't know logistics. You know people. He leaned forward. You know how to look at numbers and ask why they're wrong. I thought about it. It was exactly what my wife used to say. You always notice what other people miss. I nodded. I'll help. But I won't protect Daniel. Richard's expression softened. I don't want you to. The restructuring committee met 2 weeks later. Daniel was there. He looked at me when I walked into the conference room. His expression was pure disbelief. Dad? Hello, Daniel. What are you doing here? Richard answered. Your father is consulting on the review. Daniel looked at him. Why? Because I trust him. Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned to me. You couldn't stay out of this. I remained calm. You brought me into it when you used your company to move money. His eyes darted around the room. That's not what happened. I looked at the documents, then explain it. He didn't. Richard placed the consulting records on the table. Daniel, $185,000. Daniel stared at the page. You approved these payments? Yes. For what? Consulting. What consulting? He swallowed. Business development. Show us the work. He didn't answer. Richard leaned back. Where did the money go? Daniel looked at me, and for a second I saw the little boy again. The boy who knew when he had done something wrong. But he didn't confess. He doubled down. You people don't understand what it takes to build a company. Richard's voice was quiet. I understand exactly what it takes. Then you should understand that sometimes money has to move. Between whose accounts? Daniel looked away. I said, answer him. He turned toward me. You always do this. Do what? Make me feel like I'm disappointing you. I stared at him. This isn't about disappointing me. Of course it is. No. I pointed at the documents. This is about numbers. He shook his head. You've never understood my world. I answered quietly. I understood enough to mortgage my house for you. Silence. Everyone in the room heard it. Daniel looked down. I continued. And I never called you an embarrassment for needing help. That was when his face changed. He finally understood that I had heard what he had said about me. And for the first time, he looked ashamed. The audit eventually uncovered the missing piece. The money had been moved through 3 companies. One belonged to Olivia. One belonged to a business associate of Daniel's. The third belonged to a shell company, registered under a name almost identical to an actual supplier. The money eventually ended up in a private investment account. The account holder? Daniel. He had been moving funds out of the family company. Then he had used part of the money to cover personal losses. The rest had been used to create the appearance of another successful business. He had been borrowing from one place to hide losses in another. A classic financial trap. Eventually, the numbers became impossible to hide. I looked at Daniel across the conference table. You knew this was going to collapse. He shook his head. I thought I could fix it. With what? The next contract. There was no next contract. I was close. No. I shook my head. You were running out of places to borrow from. He looked at me. Yes. The room was silent. Then Richard said, Why did you need my father? Daniel looked at him. What? You told Michael I was embarrassed by him. I looked at Daniel. Richard continued. Why? Daniel said nothing. Richard's voice hardened. You wanted him away from me. Still nothing. Why? Finally Daniel whispered, because he would have asked questions. There it was. The truth. Daniel hadn't insulted me because he was embarrassed by my truck. He had been afraid of what I might discover. The legal consequences were serious. Daniel could have faced criminal charges. My lawyer explained the options. Richard explained the damage to the company. There was enough evidence to make a formal complaint, but I asked for one thing. Give him the chance to tell the truth first. Andrew looked at me. Michael, this is not your responsibility. I know. Then why? I thought about my son. Because if he lies again, I won't defend him. Daniel was given that choice. Tell the truth. Everything. No edited version. No blaming employees. No blaming Olivia. No blaming his father-in-law. No blaming me. He sat in a room with lawyers and auditors, and finally confessed. He admitted moving the money. He admitted hiding the losses. He admitted lying to Richard. And he admitted using me as a reason to keep people apart. The company entered a structured recovery process. Several assets were sold. Daniel lost his executive position. His personal accounts were used to repay part of the money, and he faced formal legal consequences. I didn't stop them. I simply stopped interfering. There is an important difference. I had spent years believing protecting my son meant protecting him from consequences. Now I understood that sometimes protecting someone means letting consequences teach what love couldn't. Months later, Richard approached me again. We were sitting in the same restaurant where this entire story had begun. He smiled. I still need financing. I laughed. You've been waiting months to ask. I learned my lesson. What's the loan for? A legitimate expansion. Show me the numbers. He laughed. You really are impossible. I've been told. He handed me a folder. I reviewed it. This time the numbers made sense. Clear projections, collateral cash flow, independent valuation. I closed the folder. I'll do it. Richard smiled. You trust me? I trust the paperwork. He laughed. Fair enough. Then he became serious. I wanted you to know something. What? I never thought you were an embarrassment. I looked at him. I know. No. He shook his head. I mean, I admire you. I smiled. Why? You walked into a room where your own son was ashamed of you. He paused. And you left with your dignity. I looked down. I almost didn't. But you did. I nodded. That matters. Daniel came to my house several months later. He looked thinner, older, but calmer. He sat on the porch. I owe you an apology. You've given me several. I owe you another. I smiled. Go ahead. He looked at his hands. I called you an embarrassment because I thought your life made mine look small. I waited. But the truth was the opposite. He swallowed. You built something real. I didn't say anything. I borrowed money to look successful. He shook his head. You earned yours. I looked at him. And Richard? He knows. Olivia? We're trying to work things out. Are you? I don't know. Then he said, I thought if I could become important enough, I'd never feel like the kid from our old neighborhood again. I smiled sadly. You were never supposed to become something else. He looked at me. You know what the worst part is? What? I had the one person who would have helped me. I shook my head. No. He frowned. I did help you. I know. But you didn't need my money. He looked away. You needed the courage to tell me the truth. He nodded. That was the first time he didn't argue. A few months later, I was replacing the tires on my old truck. Daniel came by. He looked at it. "That's still running," I laughed. "Of course," he smiled. "You know, I used to hate this truck." "I know. Now I kind of like it. You're getting old." He laughed. Then he looked at me. "Dad, yes. Can I borrow it?" I tossed him the keys. "Bring it back with gas." He grinned. "Deal." I watched him drive away. The same truck he once thought was embarrassing. The same truck I had driven to his first business meeting. The same truck I had used to deliver supplies when his company had no money. The same truck that had carried me home after the night he insulted me. It was old. It was scratched. It wasn't impressive. But it had done something expensive cars could never do. It had been there. My son called me an embarrassment to his in-laws. For one night, I believed him. I believed maybe I was too old, too ordinary, too out of place. Then his father-in-law asked me for a business loan. And suddenly the world turned upside down. The man who was supposedly ashamed to be connected to me had been quietly telling his in-laws that I was financially responsible. The father-in-law, who seemed to belong to a completely different world, trusted me enough to put his company's future in my hands. And the truth eventually came out. The insult wasn't really about my clothes. It wasn't about my truck. It wasn't even about my background. It was about fear. My son was afraid that if his father stood too close, people would see the cracks in the image he had built. He thought hiding me would make him look bigger. Instead, it made him look smaller. I didn't punish him for that. But I also didn't excuse it. That distinction changed our relationship. Today, Daniel is rebuilding. Slowly, he has a smaller business. He lives within his means. He drives a practical car. He doesn't pretend anymore. And when people ask about me, he doesn't say, "My father owns a small plumbing company." He says, "My dad built a business from nothing." Sometimes he even adds, "He taught me almost everything I know about money." I don't correct him. I just smile because I don't need my son to brag about me. I needed him to stop being ashamed of me, and he finally did. As for Richard, his new logistics company succeeded. The loan was repaid early. He still calls me when he has an important financial decision. Sometimes he jokes, "I need my embarrassing friend to look at these numbers." I laugh. The joke doesn't hurt anymore because I know the truth. I'm not embarrassed by the life I built. I'm not embarrassed by my truck. I'm not embarrassed by my clothes. I'm not embarrassed by where I came from. And I will never again allow someone else's insecurity to make me question my worth. My son thought I was an embarrassment to his in-laws. Then his father-in-law asked me for a business loan. What neither of them expected was that the real loan had nothing to do with money. For years, I had been lending my son something much more valuable: trust, second chances, belief. And when he finally abused all three, I stopped writing checks. Not because I stopped loving him, because love without boundaries had taught him the wrong lesson. Sometimes the strongest thing a parent can do is stop rescuing a grown child and let them become responsible for the life they chose. I did that. And somehow, that was what finally gave my son a chance to become the man I always believed he could be. If this story made you think about family pride, money, and the difference between appearing successful and actually being successful, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen someone become ashamed of the people who helped them succeed? And if you enjoyed the story, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional family stories about betrayal, money, consequences, and second chances.